very good evening to all of you. Welcome to another YouTube live session with me, Surjit Kakkar. Just give me a second. Yep, so with me, Surjit Kakkar. A Merry Christmas to all of you. Today is Wednesday, 25th of December, 2019. And let's get started with today's session. Before we do that, let's get done with the formalities, which is the disclosure, where we talk about the representations, the risk disclosure. So make sure if you're watching this stream live, you can pause this stream, you can go through the disclosure. I also have another page, so make sure you go through both these pages. If you're watching the recording, yes, you can, if you're watching it as a recorded video, then again, you can pause the recording and you can go through the disclosure, which talks about a lot of things, because you need to understand that in these sessions, I'm not trying to give you some ready-made trading ideas, tips or calls. It's just for education purpose. We'll be understanding different things. I'll be taking one topic after another. So let's get started with today's topic. And today's topic is demand, supply versus support and resistance. Now, before you go through this session, in fact, if you're joining it live, well and good, but make sure that you have gone through the previous sessions where we discussed what is demand and supply, what are the patterns of demand and supply, and also the session where we talked about what is support and resistance. Because once you go through those sessions, you will be more in connect with the explanation which I'll be giving today, which is the difference between demand and supply and support and resistance. So today's session is not going to be a very lengthy session, probably I believe maybe 10-15 minutes, nothing more than that, because there are a very few differences, right? But those few differences are very major differences. That is what we are going to talk about today. So yes, when it comes to demand and supply versus support and resistance, right? Let's understand what are the differences. Okay, just give me a second. Why is my drawing tools not working? Just give me a second. Perfect, it's working now. Right, so what are the differences? So what I'll do is on this side, left side, I'll talk about the demand and supply. On the right hand side, I'll talk about support and resistance. So the very first thing is, when it comes to demand and supply, whenever we are applying the demand and supply methodology, we don't use one single price, right? In support and resistance, what happens is they always use one single price where they are seeing a lot of bounces happening, and that becomes as an area of support and resistance. Now, to identify that one single price in itself is a very big challenge, right? Because it can be a very big challenge that, should it be 5 paise above, should it be 5 paise below? So there is no way to identify where is that exact price point. So in demand and supply, what happens is we don't use one single line, we always use a zone, which is a range. Now, if you think about it, if the big boys are placing orders, it's not that they are going to place orders at one single price. They always have a range within which they are buying, within which they are selling. So that is the difference number one, that when we talk about demand and supply, we don't about one single price point. We talk about a range, which is our demand zone, which is our supply zone, versus support and resistance, where we only have one single line, which in itself is a very big challenge, where that line should be drawn, what should be the exact price. So that is the difference number one. The difference number two is that when it comes to support and resistance, people believe, in fact, yes, this is what people have also seen. If you look in the charts, you will see this happening, that in support and resistance, what happens is once supports get violated, it can act like resistance. Once resistance is violated, it can act like support, right? So this was the very first difference, which is in demand and supply, we have a zone. In support and resistance, you just have a line. The second difference I was talking about is that in support resistance, this is the difference number two. In support and resistance, your resistance becomes support after violation, and your support becomes resistance after violation. But in demand and supply methodology, demand zone and supply zone methodology, we don't believe in that. If a demand is violated, what we know or what we understand is that, yes, if there were some pending orders, those pending orders have been depleted. And similarly, if there were some pending orders, sell orders, those sell orders have been depleted and the zone has been violated. So we don't believe in the concept of demand converting into supply or supply converting into demand. Now, one thing which I'll add here is that some of you might say that in demand and supply, there is a concept of a flip zone, which means the demand starts working as supply, or the supply starts working as demand. So this is something which I talked about in the support and resistance session, right? When we talked about what is support and resistance. I'll also talk about it as we move forward, but yes, I'll definitely touch upon that topic, that why people they believe in flip zones when it comes to demand and supply, and is that really demand and supply which is flipping, or is it something else, right? So I'll definitely talk about that. So yeah, that's your difference number two, that in demand supply we don't believe in demand changing its role as supply zone or supply changing its role as demand zone, but in support and resistance that is what people believe. And the third difference is that when it comes to support and resistance, people are looking for an area where prices have been bouncing over and over again, which can be a support, which can be a resistance, right? So it only has, I mean, it does not have a very concrete approach other than just looking for the areas of where prices have been bouncing, right? So generally people try to identify support and resistance just based on the pivot highs and pivot lows, right? So it will be your pivot highs and pivot lows. But when it comes to demand and supply, we are not looking for pivot highs, pivot lows. For demand and supply, if you remember when we did the session, what are the patterns for demand, what are the patterns for supply? We have four defined patterns, two for demand and two for supply. So the patterns for demand were drop, base, rally, and rally, base, rally. And the pattern for supply was rally, base, drop, and a drop, base, drop. So can you see when it comes to demand and supply, we have a defined pattern that this is the structure we are looking on the chart. Yes, this is also where you're looking for some structure. But like I said, you know, there is no one defined single price. But when we are looking at this structure is more concrete versus just trying to identify where are the pivot highs and pivot lows. So that's another difference, which is this is based on purely structures where we need a drop-based rally, a rally-based rally, a rally-based drop, or a drop-based drop, and here people are only looking for pivot highs and pivot lows. And the fourth difference is in support and resistance, people believe that the more number of times a zone is getting an area of support or an area of resistance is getting tested, the stronger the zone is, right? So they believe that more number of tests equals strength, right? It is more strong. But when it comes to demand and supply, we believe the opposite, right? And what we believe is in a very logical way, because if that was an area where somebody was trying to buy or somebody was trying to sell, the more number of time prices would be visiting that area, those buy orders or sell orders will not be getting increased, those buy orders, sell orders will be getting depleted. So we are applying a logic which is completely opposite of what is taught in support and resistance. At support and resistance, they start becoming stronger and stronger as in when we have more number of tests. But in demand and supply, the more number of tests, the weaker the area of demand or that area of supply is getting, right? So that's the fourth difference. And the fifth difference and the biggest difference, which we in fact talked about in the last session, is that your support and resistance, they get created because of demand and supply, right? I showed you many examples that what creates these areas of support, what creates these areas of resistance, and we saw it's basically the demand areas and the supply areas where prices visit over and over again. Example, let's say we have a drop base rally. So what happens is prices, they come back to that zone again, those unfilled orders are getting filled, you get a bounce, again you get a bounce, again you get a bounce, and now people, they start seeing it as an area of support. Similarly, let's imagine we have a drop based drop, so that's your supply. Prices go back to that supply, starts reacting, again goes back, starts reacting, and now people start seeing it as an area of resistance. So the biggest difference is that demand and supply creates your support and resistance, right? That is one of the biggest difference which we talked about the previous session. But yes, I've also given you a few more differences which is this is a zone, this is just a line. Here we have your support converting into resistance, resistance converting into support. But in demand and supply, we don't believe in that. Here we have patterns, we have concrete patterns for demand, concrete patterns for supply. People are just referring to pivot highs, pivot lows. Here the more number of tests, the weaker the zone, the more number of tests, the stronger the zone. And the fifth one is that demand and supply creates your area of support and resistance. And now coming back to this point where I was talking about that yes, in demand supply also people believe that there is a concept which is called as a flip zone. Right now, if you look into some examples, if you understand what a flip zone is, what you will realize is that the Majority of the time it works as a flip zone is when this supply has already acted like resistance. Because this supply has already acted like resistance, once it gets violated, people who believe in resistance getting converted into support, they might start buying, due to which you can get those bounces. So it's not the demand and supply which is changing its role. It's basically that area of resistance which is now acting like area of support, right? So that is why, yes, you will see that flip kind of a thing working in, you know, on the charts. But what you need to realize is, because many times you will see it works, many times you will see it will not work. Majority of the times you will see it working when a demand area or a supply area has already created a support area or a resistance area for you. And once that resistance gets violated, then that resistance acts like support, or if that support gets violated, that support starts acting like resistance. So these are the 5 differences between your support and resistance and demand and supply, which makes them completely different concepts. Because many times, you know, I get this question from people. They believe that maybe demand and supply and support and resistance are exactly the same thing. It's just that you know, I have changed the terminologies and using different terminologies to call them. It's not different terminologies, it's a complete different concept altogether. In fact, I'll also add one more difference. It just clicked my mind. The 6th difference can be that when it comes to support and resistance, we don't have a very mechanical way to do the scoring of how strong that support is, how strong that resistance is, other than the more number of tests, the stronger the support, the stronger the resistance. But when it comes to demand and supply, we have a very mechanical rule-based system to do the scoring of that demand zone or to the scoring of that supply zone. So we have a mechanical process which we call as the boosters, or you can call them as odd enhancers. So we have you know, when we apply these boosters, we have 2 different aspects we look at. So what are those 2 different aspects? The very first one is your the quality of the zone, and the second one is the probability of the zone. Now this quality scoring is done out of 10 and the probability scoring is done out of 8. So a zone can have a maximum quality score of 10 out of 10. Similarly, a zone can have a maximum probability score of 8 out of 8. So by looking at this, we understand that which is a high quality, high probability zone and I should be trading, and which is not a very good quality and not a very good probability zone and probably I should be avoiding. But we don't have something similar when it comes to support and resistance. In support and resistance, it's more number of tests, the stronger it is. But can you see here itself, we are just doing the opposite. For us, the more number of tests, the weaker the zone is. So these are the 6 differences which I can probably recall. I don't think there is any other difference. I guess this would have been probably the last difference. So there are 6 main differences between support and resistance which we talked about today, which makes support and resistance a completely different concept and demand and supply a completely different concept. Now another thing which I would like to add here is that I'm trying to do these live sessions at least 4 to 5 times in a week, and the timings for these sessions are not predefined. Why? Because whenever I have time, I quickly do a session. So since the timings are not predefined other than the Sunday session, the way to get notified is you have to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell icon. That way, whenever the session is about to start, about 10-15 minutes before that, I start with the timer. That will give you the notification that the session is about to start in about 10 to 15 minutes. And that is when you can join in and you'll get to know that the session is starting, let's say in 5 minutes or 10 minutes and 15 minutes. And then you can attend the session live. In case you're not able to attend the session live, yes, the recordings are definitely available. And last but not the least, I am taking all these topics based on the request I'm getting from you people, right? So make sure whatever topics you're looking for, put it in the comment section. I'm noting down these topics. I will be taking these topics one by one. And tomorrow what we'll be doing is we'll be taking the same topic, which is the difference between support and resistance and demand and supply, and we'll be doing that in Hindi. So whatever the differences are, we are already done with the differences, and now let's get started with the Q&As quickly, and then we'll end the session. So just give me a second, let me bring up the Q&As, right? So it's just going to take me a few more seconds. So let's bring up Q&As. All right, so thing is, I don't see any questions coming in today, probably because maybe very few people joining in, you don't have any questions. regarding the concept which we are talking about. So all I can see is Merry Christmas. Yes, a Merry Christmas to all of you. And I can see hellos and good evenings. Yes, hellos and good evenings to everyone. So since I don't see any questions coming in, we can definitely end the session today. And thank you so much for joining in. I'll see you very, very soon. Till then, trade safe, enjoy your evening, take care, bye bye.